The I'm Fine podcast is produced by L'Amour Media, LLC, and is run by Project Headspace and Timing. Project Headspace and Timing is a 501c3 that I started in 2017 after a veteran that I was a medic to decided to pull over on the side of the road and end his life. As an organization, Project Headspace and Timing works on veteran advocacy and veteran outreach. What that means is through the advocacy perspective, we try to connect veterans to other resources as early on into the process as possible. What that entails is early contact with veterans, forming a safety net with their family members, friends, and fellow service members, educating them on the resources, and when that veteran is ready to get help, we are there to make sure that they get the help that they need. The outreach aspect is put there to get veterans together to do productive and constructive things, whether it's out in nature, working with other businesses, anything to get them out around other veterans where those good conversations can happen if they want to have them. If you are interested in finding out more information about our organization, please visit projectheadspaceandtiming.org, our Facebook page, Project Headspace and Timing, or our Instagram, which is Project Headspace and Timing. And if you would like to donate to our organization, please visit our website, projectheadspaceandtiming.org, scroll to the bottom, and you will find a link to our Venmo. If you'd like to send us a check, our P.O. Box is P.O. Box 382, Manteno, Illinois, 60950. And if you'd like to sponsor or have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me at Eric P. as in Paul, at projectheadspaceandtiming.org. Thank you. Welcome to today's episode of the I'm Fine podcast, where we are going to talk about toxic masculinity with our friend, licensed professional counselor, and LGBTQ advocate, Matt Hedding-Hess. We're going to talk about where toxic masculinity came from, the differences between toxic and positive masculinity, and what our experiences have been with toxic masculinity.
Welcome to the I'm Fine podcast with your freaked out, insecure, neurotic, and emotional hosts, Eric Peterson and Brad Stozick.
See, and now you have, how many pages of notes do you have?
100, or how many do I have?
How many pages?
47.
47 pages.
47 pages.
This episode of the I'm Fine podcast is going to be 2.5 days long, so we can get through it now. I love that you did the outline. I love that you've been doing the outlines, and we're figuring out, again, the ways in which you can best write shit down and have it available for yourself.
Absolutely.
So you can go through it. And I'm hoping that this continues to work, because I think it's going pretty good, man.
Yeah, so far.
Yep.
Yeah.
So on today's episode, we wanted to talk about toxic masculinity. It's something that's kind of risen to the surface a bit more in recent years. Toxic masculinity, again, like I've talked about on multiple episodes of this podcast, is like one of those things where I first initially heard it, and I was dismissive of it.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, I did not think that I would support or really, I just didn't understand what toxic masculinity was.
Yeah, I think I'm just so uneducated. I think of, like, when I hear toxic masculinity, I think of like George of the Jungle. You know, like
That's positive masculinity.
Yeah?
George of the Jungle? Yeah, he was super nice. Like, he was nice.
Well, yeah, he was nice, but I just think of like a guy in like a loincloth with like muscles and
just really just overdoing it, kind of like The Rock.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah.
Like, you associate that with the toxic spot? Toxic masculinity?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I kind of assumed toxic masculinity was being an asshole. You know, essentially. And I know what did you find for the definition of what toxic masculinity is?
Yeah, so according to Medical News Today, toxic masculinity is the constellation of socially regressive masculine traits that serve to foster domination, the devaluation of women, homophobia, and wanton violence.
When you sent me the outline, I read wanton violence. I assumed that meant violence against wontons.
Yeah.
Which I also am against, but that's not what wanton violence means.
Wow.
What is wanton violence? What is wanton?
So I looked it up, and an example of it that Google gave it was if you're going over to your neighbor because they have a nice garden and they're gardening and you say, hey, you have a really nice garden. I really like it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they hit you with whatever gardening tool that they have. So it's just like acts of aggression for no reason.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now I'm tracking. I got you. Okay.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily just like, fuck your wontons.
Your wontons suck.
Right. Yes. So, like you were talking about, I definitely, that's kind of what I associated with, obviously being an asshole.
Yeah.
The devaluation of women, homophobia, violence, that dominating attitude, all of that is just, I definitely understood that. What else did you find about the definition of it?
So it has not always been the same definition, and it kind of changes with the times,
Okay.
right? So it's been, so like when it first started, there was a totally different meaning. But in like today's society, the use of the term is to describe exaggerated masculine traits that that many cultures actually have. That have widely accepted or glorified them. So like other cultures. So in America, what we think is like a over masculine, toxic masculinity, other cultures have embraced those.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Those cultures and those
Do you
things.
have a couple of examples of like a couple of things that you would associate with that?
No, you know what? I didn't find it. No, I don't.
Some of the things that I saw where the definition places a real significant importance on the manliness stuff is kind of based on strength, lack of emotion, dominance, sexual virility. The lack of emotion's like a super big one, I think. Like you have that. And again, this is coming, like I practice stoicism, but stoicism does not mean lack of emotions. And a lot of people think that it does. But I understand, like I've always had that attitude thrust upon me in the military, especially with where you're not supposed to really be emotional. So I definitely understand how that's a part of it. Where did toxic masculinity start?
So according to theconversation.com, toxic masculinity began during the New Age men's movement of the 1980s. So the movement, basically, it focused on men's healing, using male-only workshops, wilderness retreats, and rites of passage to rescue what it saw as as essentially masculine qualities and archetypes. Okay. So basically the king, the warrior, the wild man, right? So to rescue that from what is dubbed toxic masculinity.
Okay.
So it's basically to bring back, I guess, men as manly men, essentially.
Without necessarily being toxic.
Being toxic, yep.
Yeah, because I saw, so in the 90s, early 2000s, that term spread to other self-help circles into the academic work. Some conservatives began applying that term to the low-income, underemployed, marginalized men, and they were prescribing solutions like restoring male-dominated families and family values. And I know that the term saw a rise in 2015, and it kind of changed a bit. But yeah, so I think that the men's healing and male-only workshops, wilderness retreats, I think all that stuff's super important. And I also think that's kind of where, like, I imagine that that's also what men did thousands of years ago, really. You know what I mean? Because you're spending time hunting with other men. You're spending time doing things like that, camping around other men. And I found something that kind of piggybacked off that, according to, and I love this website just because of the name. It's called Poosh. Poosh.com. The origins of toxic masculinity, according to them, began thousands of years ago when Homo sapiens would use physical strength, dominance, and aggression to fight and hunt. These behaviors continue for centuries into contemporary times where these behaviors are no longer necessary and the attitude is still promoted. Continuing this type of masculinity becomes toxic since it's outdated and incompatible with the current times. Now, I agree with some of this. I disagree with some of this. The part that I disagree with is the last part where it says that it's outdated and incompatible with current times, because that's what the military is.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not trying to say this in any way to slam the military. I understand why they have to be that way. But, like, you can't say that it's completely incompatible. There's a lot of times where it's incompatible with current times, but we can't just say it's completely off the table. Otherwise, fucking militaries just wouldn't exist, right? But so toxic masculinity occurs when cultural pressures condition men to behave in traditional, stereotypical masculine ways. Conforming to this type of behavior entails suppressing their feelings, avoiding distress, being tough, using violence or aggression to portray their power. And ultimately, the primary focus becomes on gaining power and respect and being strong. So the key thing with that too is like cultural pressures, right? Yep. Cultural pressures. What are young boys being taught? And usually it's just, and my father never was like this to me, and I'm very thankful for that. He was never like this, but I've seen it happen a lot, and I know a lot of people who say that they've done it, where you tell the young boy, just shut the hell up and deal with it.
Yeah.
You're going to be a man.
Yep.
So you got to learn how to just bottle all this shit up, and then hopefully it'll just be fine. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And that's super challenging. And I really want to kind of dig into this more, but before we dig into this topic, I wanted to invite our guest on. So our guest is coming on today. He's a friend of mine, and we have a lot of connections, which is pretty funny. We didn't realize that until the first time he talked to me. He is a licensed professional counselor and LGBTQ advocate, Matt Hedding-Hess, and I'm really excited to have him on. So when we come back, we will be on here with Matt Hedding-Hess. Cool. So we're back with Matt Hedding-Hess. Matt, thank you very, very, very much for being here today, man. Really appreciate that.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So Matt, what I said when I introduced you is that you're a licensed professional counselor and LGBTQ advocate. Can you kind of introduce yourself and elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure, yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm a licensed professional counselor.
Yeah.
Been in the mental health field for a long time, about 15 years now at this point, locally. Kind of done everything from residential treatment to sexual assault work. And currently I'm kind of started my own practice so that I can work in the school district. So I work in the Kankakee schools, meeting with students, doing mental health work with them in, where they are, hoping to reduce some barriers to getting mental health services. So it's a cool program they've got going on. So that's what I'm doing currently. I also run an organization called the Kankakee Area LGBTQ Network, which is really just a resource and kind of community making thing. There's not a lot of space for LGBTQ folks in our community. So do a lot of like meetups and resource sharing and things like that. So that's kind of takes up most of my time.
Yeah.
I'm also a father, and that's exciting. Got a little 3-year-old. So, that takes up most of my time and a lot of my sanity. So,
yeah, man.
So,
and I've seen, and what's your 3-year-old's name?
RJ.
And I've seen RJ out before, but RJ seems like he listens for the most part. I don't know if that's just like first kid syndrome or what.
I'm glad I'm glad that I've made it look like that way.
Yeah. Because I don't know, like my youngest is the same age as RJ. Cece's 3, and she's just like a little monster.
Yeah.
And so I see other kids out in public, and I'm like, oh man, they seem like they're just being so well behaved.
Oh,
and it just makes I'm just like, ugh. But like you said, you're just putting on a great front, man.
Yeah.
So you're doing something right.
They're a holy terror at 3 years old. It's tough.
So now, I talked to you about this episode. I just said we were going to talk about toxic masculinity, and I was curious on what your opinion on it was going to be, things from your perspective. And we talked about doing this before we ever actually had the podcast up and running. I remember I talked to you about it at like some like resource fair or something like that over at Riverside.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That was like over a year ago.
Yeah, I had heard you on the Kankakee podcast and talked about that episode and just what you're doing, and you'd kind of mentioned that. So it's been a long time in the making.
I know it doesn't feel like it, but sometimes it doesn't feel like it, but COVID just kind of screwed up my understanding of like time. You know what I mean?
Of course.
But no, so okay, the first thing that we were talking about before we get into more things about toxic masculinity, especially when it comes to your role now working with schools and everything like that, and working with kids. How do you think cultural pressures helps or hurts toxic masculinity?
Oh, I mean, I think that's really what toxic masculinity comes from is cultural pressures. I think that's where it's from. When I've talked with young people, especially, but in general, men about mental health, I always reference this thing called the man box. Kind of brought it as a reference too, but it's a really good reference by this guy named Tony Porter. Has a really good TED talk out there too, if you ever want to look him up. But he references this thing called the man box, which really is like this slate of things that men are expected to do. Things like not crying openly, expressing their emotions, not expressing weakness or fear, demonstrate power and control, especially over women, aggression and dominance, be the protector, do not be like a woman, be heterosexual, do not be like a gay man, be tough, athletic, strong, make decisions not with help, doing those things without help, and then viewing women as property and objects. So I always think that's you can kind of look at that from like a cultural perspective, that not every area in the world views masculinity that way.
Right.
I think that's a pretty specific Western view of masculinity, and so it's a problem we've got going on here in our country specifically, I think.
Well, and we were talking right before we came on here, like my experience growing up. So I'm very thankful in that, like, one, I had a very, very strong mother. And then like my dad is insanely laid back. So like I didn't understand what toxic masculinity was because I never like saw it happen in my household, which I'm very thankful for. And my dad wasn't the type of dad who would just stand over me and be like, shut up and don't talk about your feelings. Like that was not my dad.
Yeah.
So I didn't know that was happening to other people until other friends of mine would have that mentality. And then you start playing sports, and as soon as you start getting into sports, you start seeing that mentality, right?
Sure.
You see a kid getting hurt and his dad standing over him telling him to just rub dirt on it, get up, you're fine, just grit your teeth and get through it. And then I started to realize that it was way more prominent than I thought it was. And so it's like, do you think that when it's happening to men or boys at a young age, do you automatically think that that's because they're a product of their environment? Do you think it's more long-term because of these traits that have been, that men have had for thousands of years? Do you think it's a little bit of both? Like, what's your opinion?
Yeah, no, I have a very similar upbringing. My dad's laid back. My mom's the pants in the relationship kind of lady. But these sort of things were demonstrated to me just through modeling, right? Like my dad never said "I love you" or gave us hugs, right? It wasn't that he like outwardly said you can't say "I love you." It's that as a man, he didn't do those things.
There's a lack of emotion.
Yeah. So I think that's when you talk about how this is ingrained in us, I think it's really ingrained on the men we see, right? And so that's, I always talk about representation mattering so much, but it's important to see men going to therapy. It's important to see men spending time with their kids, staying at home, just doing all the things that society would tell us men aren't supposed to do, and I think that's what changes it. It's what we see in the media too, right? I mean, any movie you see about the stereotypical man. Yeah, The Rock.
He's in every fucking movie.
Yeah.
And he's the same dude in every movie. He's the most manly man that's ever existed, like every time. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
all right,
true.
All right, fine, whatever.
Yeah, no, for sure. So it's just what we see, and so until there's, I think, an effort to show men being different or behaving differently, that's the products that we're going to see in our young men, and you see that, I see that working in the schools.
Oh yeah,
I think specifically. I don't want to say anything negative about Kankakee schools, but they have a bad rap, right? Kankakee has a reputation, has since I was in school. There's, I think in specific communities too, this becomes even more specific, which is why I would recommend checking out that TED Talk with Tony Porter too, because he's a Black man and talks about his experience growing up in an inner city too. And as a Black man, how this stuff was, I would say, even more amplified than even in my experience.
Do you think the lack of having like rites of passage for males in like America is part of it? at all? Or what's your opinion on that? Because it's like so many other cultures. And after you tell me what you think about it, I have a couple of examples of like just some insane current rites of passage that are like happening right now across the world for young boys that are becoming men. And I feel like we don't see that really happen in America. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I didn't know, like, what do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there are rites of passage as young men here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think about a lot of these things, right? Like your first time having sex is a big rite of passage.
Yeah, you're right.
And,
That's true.
And how that plays out can be, especially if you decide to share it with your friends, can be a big make or break sort of thing for a young man, his reputation. I think we have rites of passage. They might just be a little different. I don't know.
It just kind of sucks because like there's not as much support with your rites of passage as I feel like there are in other countries. I mean, you have like religious rites of passage, and like bar mitzvahs and baptism and things and like that I get because it's like a community thing. It's like we're together and then you're going to do this thing and then you're going to be brought back into the community. But like you said, when it comes to like your first time having sex, like hopefully your parents talked to you about it, or you were going to public school, so you probably learned about it in 4th grade on the bus. But like if not, it's kind of like, well, you better figure it out. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah. I think that can be a pretty difficult part of it too, but I don't know.
Totally. And I think the way that because a lot of parents don't talk about it, the way that young men learn about that rite of passage specifically is through what? Porn, which probably drives home all of these
worst
things. Way. Yeah, for sure.
To learn about just how a relationship is. You know what I mean? That's which is a good point. But no, so I found a few rites of passage I just wanted to read off here pretty quickly. Got this from artofmanliness.com, coincidentally. The first one was one that you and I were talking about before this. It's called Vanuatu land diving. So around April or May, villagers of a small island nation called Vanuatu build crude wooden towers 100 feet tall. Participating men tie a vine to the platform of the tower, then around their ankles, and then dive from the platform headfirst, reaching speeds of up to 45 miles per hour. The goal is to land close enough to the ground to touch it without dying. And it's been going on for 15 centuries, serves as a rite of passage for tribes, boys into manhood. Boys as young as 5 years old take part in this. Oftentimes, the ritual is preceded by a circumcision. The higher the jump is, the more manly the boy is considered to be. And like, talk about a shitty day. It's like, I'm going to become a man. And then you jump off the tower. And my thing is like, I hope that they tell them like the whole, what all's going to happen today. Because otherwise, like, you get done jumping off the tower, like, hey, am I a man now? And you're like, well, finish phase 1. Come on over here, man. Like that, it's insane. And that's happening like right now. One that, an older one, is the Spartan helot killings. So military training for Spartan soldiers started at age 7 when the boys were taken from their families and placed in the Agoge system, which was their training academy. For the next 10 years, Spartan boys learned skills to become trained killing machines. When they turned 18, they completed their training, but to graduate, they had to undergo the Cryptia, which is where young men were sent to the countryside with a knife only, and their goal was to kill as many state-owned slaves as possible without being detected or getting killed themselves. So insane, just an insanely profound thing to ask of a young boy, which kind of seems to be the norm up to current. And the last one that I found that I just wanted to talk about is called the Satir Maw Bullet Ant Glove. In the Brazilian Amazon, there's a Satir Maw tribe, and to become a man there, you have to stick your hand in a glove woven with bullet ants, which, according to Schmidt Sting Index, has the most painful sting in the ant world, and withstand their stings for over 10 minutes without making a noise. And if the village elders aren't happy with you, they'll make you do it again until you're quiet enough. So it's like those rites of passages are meant to separate the individual from the community, transition them into whoever they are to become, and then reincorporate them back into community. And I never felt like that was happening a lot on our end. I do feel like the military was kind of that, but also the problem with the military in relation to this is, you get you go through the first two stages, the separation stage and then the transition stage. When you're overseas, you're getting your whatever experience it is, but you don't have that reintegration back into the community stage, really. And you get no education on it. You know what I mean? And you have this anger, you have this whatever that you might have, and you bring it home with you and you don't know what to do with it. And that's super terrifying, that I'm sure kids deal with. I'm sure everybody deals with it with certain traumatic experiences. But I think I just wish the rites of passage were something we would kind of, I don't know, maybe make a bigger deal about.
I think we don't have a rite of passage because we don't really have a sense of community. Like there's small parts of this country where there's, like sense of community, but as a whole, we don't really have that.
Yeah.
At least I don't think so.
No, we're individualists, right? Like you're meant to kind of do those things for yourself, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Why, your first time having sex is such a rite of passage, because it's like you've done this thing for yourself, and it says a lot about you as an individual,
for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And now, from your side of things, like when it comes to common examples of toxic masculinity, what are your common examples and your experiences with toxic masculinity?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about the word, right? Because I think it's a controversial term. I think a lot of guys hate to be labeled as,
for sure,
to talk about that word. It's a touchy subject with men, and I think as someone who grew up, went to high school as a gay man, experienced it all, right? All the bullying and crap from other guys. I know what that means, right? The word toxic masculinity means that an expression of your gender that harms somebody, right? So it just, that definition to me, there's lots of those things, right? Like anytime that you, the stories of hitting on women at a bar, things like that, right? Like feeling like you can just walk up to someone, stare at them,
catcalling.
Send them a drink, the catcalling, right? Yeah. And you talk to any woman how much she hates that. Right?
I didn't think catcalling was a thing, honestly. Again, common sense is common experience. And like when I think of catcalling, I think of a 1920s construction worker. It's like, hey, or like nice ankles or like whatever. Like that's what I think of, because it blows my mind to think that somebody would have the ego to say to themselves, like, I'm going to comment on this girl's appearance and she's going to love it. And she's just going to be like, I'm totally going to sleep with this guy. Like it blows my mind that that's the logic that goes through a rational person's head. And they're just like, nope, I'm totally fine with this decision. You know what I mean? But yeah, you're right. I mean, all that stuff is very real and it's very, sorry. Anyway, you were saying.
That's all right. No. So I mean, those are the things that kind of come to mind for me, right? Like those expressions of that kind of, I don't know, and a lot of times we put those on for other men, right? I mean, guys do that so that other guys will think that they're more powerful. And I know that that's a word that you guys have already mentioned a little bit, is that power dynamic. Men have to have power over women, and so that they can exert power over other men.
Is that just, do you think that's because of just how uncomfortable men are with feeling vulnerable? And I don't think it's just men. I mean, nobody likes to really feel vulnerable, I don't think.
No, for sure.
But I feel like men really have a problem feeling vulnerable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Vulnerability is a tricky word, right?
Yeah.
It has a really negative connotation. And I love, I don't know if you guys follow any Brene Brown, but she talks a lot about vulnerability. And she refers to it as like the risk of the risk versus the reward a little bit, right? Like, when you're vulnerable with something, it's taking a risk. You're putting yourself out there to share something that could hurt or help you. Right. So nobody likes being vulnerable. But I think men in particular, when we're vulnerable, it's a big risk, because if you're shot down, if you feel like you look stupid, talking about how you're feeling, right?
Being embarrassed.
So you just don't do it, right?
Yep.
And I think that's a lot of where that comes from, and I think, I don't know. Yeah. Sorry.
No, man. Yeah, I mean, my thing was like, so when I talked to my therapist, the one thing that we figured out together was the way that I describe like the trauma in my brain is it's the warehouse in Raiders Lost Ark. Like it was Raiders, right? Pretty sure it was Raiders.
Yes. Yep.
Thank you, Jake. In Raiders, where it's like this gigantic, empty or warehouse full of shit, and then every time something bad would happen to me, I'd put it in a little box. and I put it in the back of that warehouse. And then for me, I like working out. So when I would go to the gym, I would open that box up and get all those emotions out there, and then I would just put it back in the box. And it was working to me. It was working for me for a while, and then it stopped working. And when I was talking to my therapist about it, she was just like, well, like, you can't just control your emotions like that. You can't just tell yourself you're just going to do this forever, because one day those boxes will start leaking, and then you're like, oh shit. And now you have all of this stuff coming down on you. And that's what was happening to me, because I thought that I could deal with it for that long. And everybody's different. I understand that. Some people can deal with it until they're in their 60s or 70s and then just have a heart attack usually or something, right? And some people can't. But like, I couldn't deal with how I was handling it, and I didn't even know that I wasn't handling it correctly. You know what I mean? But anyway, so what are some common examples of toxic masculinity that you found, Brad?
So according to the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, there were the three big ones. There was toughness, anti-feminism, and power.
Yeah. And again, power and anti-feminism have been, like, reiterated a bunch. Toughness, I don't think toughness is, I think toughness is kind of getting a bad rap here, because being tough, I don't think is a bad thing. I don't think being tough means you're being is an example of toxic masculinity to me. Because what is tough? Just being able to stand up to adversity or something, you know what I mean? Like, and just not giving a shit. Like, I think that's pretty great. But yeah, obviously, like the anti-feminist stuff and just needing power. And again, it's just like, I don't know if that's something that's just, it's beaten, and it's a generational thing. Like, every generation tells the next generation this is what you have to do, and then we just kind of assume that that's how we are, or if it's something deeper in our brain, in our whatever, something primal that we just feel like we need to be the alpha of the pack all the time. You know what I mean?
I think it's a little bit of both, right?
Yeah,
so, I mean, think about all the people like World War II veterans, and you know what I mean, like Vietnam veterans. They don't.
Well, that was again drawing parallels to the veteran community. And the thing that's really hard about being a veteran is that, because I read an example earlier that was talking about how toxic masculinity has no place for today. And the reason why I have an issue with that statement is I agree that it has no place in most situations. But the idea of being toxic and being toxic with your masculinity without sounding like terrible, I guess, is a basis of what, like, it means to be in the infantry, in the military. Like, those are all tactics that are, and things that are encouraged by your leadership. And it's pushed into you because you have to be in the right state of mind, because you're going to go to probably another country and you may have to kill somebody, and you need to be okay with it. So how else do we make a rational human being okay with it? We tell you to not feel anything. You know what I mean? And then
absolutely.
And it works for guys for a little while, especially when you are around other like-minded people and you feel comfortable, and then you come home and then that door shuts, and then you sit there in your room staring around with these thoughts that you have, and you're like, oh shit. And that's when it becomes a problem. Because the suicide rate in men
4 times as high.
Well, 4 times as high. It's like men make up, I think, something I saw in the CDC, I mean, I don't know. I could be wrong, but it was like men make up 49% of the population and 80% of the suicides, or something like that.
Wow.
Like what the fuck? Like, that's a problem. You know what I mean? And obviously, correlation again doesn't mean causation, but still, it's just like, I have to imagine that a little bit of that is just due to the fact that guys are just holding in their emotions and like not talking about it until they just burst at the seams. Because as we've talked about before, obviously stress, anxiety, all those things can severely impact your health.
Oh yeah.
And so if you're going to sit there and hold on to that shit forever, and then just propagate it even further by telling other young men, like, to not talk about their feelings, like, the one thing that I always give to the younger generations that I always think gets missed out on is that they see the things that the older generations don't. It's happening to us, with the generations after us, and it's going to continue happening. And we always get mad at it first because it's change. We're like, I don't understand it, so it's wrong. But it's like they're talking about something that we should have talked about, but we're not talking about. And they're like, hey, you guys should talk about it. And that's what I love about every younger generation. So when I see masculinity now, I feel like I see a lot of positive examples of it, which I I love.
Absolutely. Well, and I would just add too, you mentioned that the study saying that the toxic masculinity has no place in America today. I would agree with that toxic masculinity might not have any place, but that doesn't mean that masculinity doesn't have a place, right? Like masculinity is not just doesn't look just one way. And I think that's important. Like I've heard different terms kind of replacing that toxic word.
Yeah.
And I love the idea of like mindful masculinity, like present to what you're experiencing now, right? Like masculinity doesn't look like power over women because we see ourselves on equal footing with women today, presently in most capacities, right? So that idea of that you have power, that you have to have power over a woman, or that you have to make more money than her and work more than her, or those sort of things don't really apply to today. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't apply to today to be a protector, to be a provider.
Yes.
I think there are good qualities of healthy masculinity that are definitely still applicable and important. But that masculinity that harms, it just doesn't apply in our country today, because we, like you said, our new generations know better, we do better, and we see each other a lot more as equals than maybe previous generations.
Yeah, and one of the things that you said too that just kind of dinged in my head, and I made a note about it, was this has happened to me, and it's happened to some of my friends too, where our wives, girlfriends, whoever, like just make more money than us, and it bothers me, and I can't put my finger on it, but it's just like something inside me is like, I'm not doing my job. That's why it bothers me. It's because I feel like I should be the one as the breadwinner, and now that I'm not, my value is going down. And being that she is doing more than me, it makes me feel like I think I'm less of a man. You know what I mean? And then I think about the examples that I've seen about men that have exerted their power over women. And I use personal examples, like people that I know, whether I was friends with the guy or the girl or whoever, and then seeing that kind of stuff happen. And like just being able to compare it to myself, I would assume that you would do that because you don't want to lose that person. And so you try to make them rely on you somehow by doing these things psychologically, which is obviously such the wrong answer, because I always kind of felt like, at least with my wife, being her husband, it's my role to make sure that she is continuing to be the best version of herself, whatever that means. And hopefully that means that I'm a part of that. But if I'm her best friend, I should want that for her. You know what I mean? But anyway, so some other, like we talked about, common examples, bullying and catcalling, I thought were the prime, like the big two. And again, like catcalling was just something that was so kind of foreign to me. But when it comes to thinking about some other common examples in the media, I want to talk about one new one, one older one. The newest one, Andrew Tate. So are you familiar?
I'm very familiar. Yeah.
I wasn't super familiar with this guy because I don't listen to any of his bullshit. So Andrew Tate was called the King of Toxic Masculinity, which is a title I believe he gave himself with pride. He was kicked off Big Brother in 2016 for a video that showed him attacking a woman with a belt. He was arrested in Romania on December 29, 2022 with his brother on suspicion of human trafficking and rape, and also forming an organized crime group. He's been banned from every social media website for his constant hate speech, breaking the rules about hate speech, misogyny, and just all sorts of other stuff. Some of the things that he has said, according to skynews.com, because I wanted to pull up some actual things that this guy said, because I didn't know much about him, right? He said women belong in the home, women are property of men, that 40% of the reason he moved to Romania was because it would be easier to evade rape charges, and depression isn't real, you feel sad, move on. So the dude, giant bag of shit, like just a huge bag of shit. And then surprisingly, he's doing all this illegal stuff, and now he's going to get arrested and thrown in big boy prison, which is just like, what? Like, the fact that you can get away with that kind of stuff now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then the scary thing with being anonymous online is then you have these people that share those feelings and come out of the woodwork that you didn't even think existed to support guys like this. So they are able to have that platform, which is just such a kind of tragic thing. And then a little bit older one, but one that also is worth mentioning when it comes to like the boys will be boys mentality, Brock Turner. So Brock Turner, if you don't know, he was an ex-Stanford University swimmer convicted of sexual assault of an incapacitated woman. The judge that sentenced Turner sentenced him for 6 months in jail as a punishment for ruining someone's life, because the judge said that anything more would have been too harsh considering Turner's honored life as an athlete at Stanford. And according to the judge, Turner was just trying to have fun, took it too far with his intoxication. So he didn't say boys will be boys, but is pretty much what he said. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And also Turner only served 3 months of the 6. Luckily, that judge was recalled. So it's like examples of this shit are right now. Like you can look online and see examples of toxic masculinity that's almost being encouraged, which is, again, terrifying. So when you talk about the man box versus what you believe the expectations of men are today, like what do you think the expectations of men are? Like you mentioned earlier, like protector. You know what I mean? Like what other kind of things do you think of?
I mean, I think of, a vulnerability, right? Like I think of being able to kind of like share feelings in a way, I post this often. I feel like I say this a lot, but vulnerability is a strength. And it is okay to be strong. It's important to be strong. And I think that's a good quality of men. And sometimes that strength also means being vulnerable, being authentic and saying how you feel, especially to people that you love. So I think about that. I also think to be a man today is to actually be feminist and actually see women as equal and capable of being able to do anything that men can do. I think that's what I would say is part of being a man today. Some of the other things, like toughness, you mentioned toughness. I think that's an important trait of being a man.
For sure.
It's not necessarily a bad quality. It's just that toughness that harms, right? Like going back to that. But some of those other, like being athletic, being strong, courageous, those things are important. I think that those are good qualities. They can be good qualities. They can be taken too far. And actually, if you're not athletic, which, that's a lot of my bullying in high school came from that, right? I'm not athletic. I'm not, I got the basketball thrown at my head. So then I'm, that fits this other thing in the man box is you're then feminine because you're not masculine. Right. But I just think that some of those things can be, while they might be posed as negatives, they can be good things as well. Like being a protector is a good thing. Do you feel like you have to protect every woman?
Right.
Do you feel like you're better to protect a woman than the woman can protect herself? Those sort of things, like it can go too far. But I think a lot of these things can be framed in a different way as positive traits,
Yeah, and I think context matters so much too on the situation. It'd be very easy to say everything's so black and white, but so for me, I believe in being a gentleman, like as much as I can, like holding doors open and things like that. And I held a door open once at a gym, and I held it open for a woman because I forget what like the rules are. In the Midwest, I feel like it's like 30 feet. You'll hold the door if there's anybody within 30 feet. But I held the door for her and she said, "I can do that myself, thank you." And I was like, "Hey, I'm not doing this because I don't think you can do it. I'm doing it because in my head, you're more important than me. And I think you should enter the building before I enter the building. That's all. I'm not trying to be an asshole about it." And that's where I get into the weeds, I think, sometimes with toxic masculinity when I'm reevaluating the things that I've done. Because have I done toxic masculine things? Absolutely. I'm 100% positive. And I can think of some times where I've acted in such a way where it's very embarrassing, because I do think it was toxic for sure. But for the most part, especially I think since having like daughters, I feel like I'm more on the positive side. And I feel like I'm starting to see more positive examples. I don't know if you both, like Brad, can you think of a positive example of positive masculinity that you have seen or that you kind of exhume?
I don't know if it's positive. I don't know if it's like being masculine, but I let my daughter do my makeup the other day.
Yep.
And we were just like playing dress up and stuff. I don't know if that counts.
It's like, what dad's not going to do that?
Yeah. I don't.
Your daughter wants to do makeup, and my daughter's like painting my nails and stuff. I don't give a shit. Like,
yeah. I don't know. Does that count? I'm not sure if that's like a good example. I don't know.
Example. Yeah. What about you? What are some positive examples that you, Matt, can think of?
I mean, the one first thing that comes to mind is anytime I get a man come in the door for therapy, it always feels like a win, right? Like it's hard to get them to just agree to do that. So whether they've got someone in their corner being like, you really need to go, or whatever the case may be, when I get a man walk in the door and say, you know, I want to give this a try, I think that's a win.
Yeah.
You know, like, and Eric, you're kind of sharing that you could go to a therapist yourself. I think more of us should talk about seeing a therapist because it's not so scary. It's actually a really great thing, and it kind of gives you a space to a safe place to talk about those feelings. Like, that's what I'm supposed to do here, and so it's okay to do that. So that's the kind of thing that comes to mind, is like guys just kind of stepping out and taking the risk of looking like an idiot, right? Walking around with your fingernails painted or whatever. Like, I love that because I paint my nails for fun sometimes. And my son at this point now wants me to paint his nails. And I get a little worried about that. I get scared about what he's going to face when he goes to school. Like, who's going to be the first person to tell him you can't do that?
Right.
So it excites me to see like guys kind of stepping out and taking risks and being like, yeah, like you can paint your nails. You can be gentle with your daughter. Those sort of things.
Like, I feel like at the core of it, it's just don't judge. And don't be an asshole. Love unconditionally. It's kind of about it.
Yeah.
As long as you like keep those things in mind, it's kind of fine. It's like being vulnerable is also, I feel like, very beneficial for your own mental health. Because like my mom passed away, and it was the worst experience of my life. And like when it happened, I've talked about it on the podcast before, like I told myself I wasn't running from anything, like including emotionally. And so if I wanted to cry, I was going to cry. If I wanted to be mad, I was going to be mad, as long as I wasn't taking on anybody. But like I was going to allow myself to have that emotion for what I would constitute as like a reasonable amount of time, like, because I can't let it completely consume my life. Sure. But like if there's so many times, like almost every day, every other day, I would think of something about my mother and cry for months and months and months. And I still do at times, right? And it's just like, I would sit there with the emotion. I would allow myself to feel it. Like I feel like in your mind, when that emotion starts to come up as a man, you just put like a hand up and you're like, nope, wait. And the scene that I think of that plays in my head all the time. Have you guys seen the original Red Dawn? Ugh, what? All right, Jake, turn it off. We're going home.
I haven't seen it either.
Uh-oh.
Brad?
Not the original.
Today is the last episode of the I'm Fine podcast. Thank you for tuning in. It's a great movie. It's a phenomenal movie, and I love Patrick Swayze. I was a huge Swayze fan. And in the movie, there's this scene where some brief context is these kids from a high school are fighting in a war zone now because war came to the United States, and they lost a lot of their friends, their family, and all this other stuff. And Patrick Swayze gets up around this fire and he walks around and everybody's crying. And Patrick Swayze goes, "Don't cry. Hold it back. Let it turn to something else." Those were the words that he used. That would play in my head whenever I would start to feel like an emotion immediately. And I feel like just the act of doing that can be so detrimental to your own mental health. The fact that you're immediately putting a hand up and saying, nope, don't feel that. Let it turn to something else. So when everything happened with my mom, I just let it happen. And then in doing so, it's helped me deal with it. It's helped me process it better. Because I don't feel like I'm running from anything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And what a beautiful thing you're saying. I mean, I always think this is a therapist thing too, right? But we project kind of the stuff that we're dealing with on our own on other people. Yeah. And I think that's a great example. That's what toxic masculinity is. Mm-hmm. I have no doubt that these men that exhibit all of these things in the man box are doubly critical of themselves,
right,
and beating themselves up for everything that they do that might look gay, that might look feminine, that might not exhibit power, and so as a therapist, like that's important stuff for men to hear. Like, I know you're beating yourself up about that.
mm-hmm.
Every word you say, every time you get emotional about something, I think that's really important. So it's how powerful it is to say that out loud. Like, it's okay to just let myself experience those feelings. It doesn't mean anything about who I am or how manly I am or whatever. Like, just to experience those things and let it out. It's powerful.
And thank you. And I'd said this before, but it's like when like something in my brain just kind of snapped when my buddy killed himself before I started this nonprofit. And up until that point in my life, I was falling into a lot of like toxic masculinity for sure and all this other stuff. And then something in my head just snapped because of how positive of a guy he was. And it just like really messed with me. Mm-hmm. And then at that point, I just kind of told myself that I was done. And not done as in I'm going to kill myself. I said I'm done with whatever bullshit, fake, disingenuous way I'm living mentally. Like, I can't do this. I'm watching it destroy other people around me, other positive male figures. And that, like I said, that messed with me. So at that point, I just realized that I don't really give a shit. Like, I'll just say, like, this is how I feel, and like, it is what it is. You know what I mean? And I think that's a good thing, because to me, that's a masculine thing, is kind of not so much giving a shit and just saying, this is how I feel. Yeah. If it's a good, positive thing, that's an encouraging thing. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But and then, so I'd also seen some positive masculinity in some other places. One of the things that I love the most, so I'm still sort of involved, but I don't compete anymore. I was involved in the amateur strongman community.
Okay.
And so you get into a community like that and I don't know, and this may sound terrible, but it's like you would maybe think that it would be like a toxic masculinity environment. You're dealing with individual males, strong as shit, doing whatever they're doing to be strong. Oh, and they're all in one room competing against each other. So you would think that, right? But what I found is it was the most supportive, encouraging place where like you would go in there and everybody just wanted to see you do the best. It didn't matter who you are, what you look like, if you were in the sport, if you just got into the sport, this was your first competition, if you screwed up on the lift, like it didn't matter. Everybody was there cheering for you. You know what I mean? And I needed that type of environment, because that reminded me of the military, in that I'm surrounded by a bunch of males. We're doing something that's positive and that I would consider masculine, I guess. And it's not toxic. You know what I mean? Like, it's a very welcoming environment, which is something that I really appreciated. So other than that, when it comes to positive masculinity, one thing that I found, according to greenhillrecovery.com, healthy or positive masculinity is just the idea that men can be emotionally expressive, have female friends or mentors, and express their emotions without feeling emasculated, like we just talked about. Now, the big part about that Matt was talking about too, expressing your emotions without feeling emasculated. And why that's such a complicated issue, because not only is it so hard, I think, for a lot of men to feel vulnerable, but God forbid the situation comes up where I do reach out and I'm like, hey man, like I'm not feeling too good. Like I gotta talk to you about something. And you're just like, dude, just suck it the fuck up, man. Come on. I see that happen a lot too. And it could come from another male. It could come from a female too, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, it's not just a one-person issue when it comes to toxic masculinity. And I also think about that, especially from the nonprofit side, like that's what we do, man. We work with veterans of all kinds. And it's like, if somebody reaches out to you because they need help, the worst thing you could do is make them feel bad about being vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
That's such a terrible thing to do to anybody. So yeah, and I always thought that was a huge problem. That's the only kind of, not necessarily like opposition to toxic masculinity, but just part of the problem that I kind of think exacerbates it, that some people may overlook.
Yeah.
What do you think men need to do as far as like men that aren't sure? Because again, toxic masculinity, when I first heard about it, I dismissed it. And then as time went on, I started to think about it like everything else. And I'm like, oh shit, this makes sense. This definitely makes sense. And then I started to try to be cognizant of the things that I was doing that were positive and negative. What do you think a man should do?
I mean, so you kind of just the anecdote that you just shared makes me a little sad. I like to think that we're beyond that point
What's that?
where people asking, reaching out and asking for help and being told like to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? Like I like to think that as a society, we've kind of know more about mental health than to think that that's going to be the response that you get. Because what I think men need to do is reach out and ask for help, and be vulnerable and just take that leap and see what happens. Because what I find happens is that whether it's in the therapy room or whether it's talking with a friend, is that they get the camaraderie of like, oh, I've been there, man, right? Like I've felt that way too, right? The reason that suicide is quadrupled for men compared to women, why depression is a problem, why aggression is a problem, is because men think that they're doing it all on their own, and so they're comparing themselves to what they think a man should be, and because they feel sad, they're like, men don't feel sad, right? The only emotion I'm supposed to be able to feel is anger,
right?
And so they feel like they're doing it on their own, and so when the only antidote to that is to know that you're not alone, and to reach out and be told like, yeah, I've been there, man. And men do get sad and men do cry, and I think that's what men need to do, is to put themselves out there and take that leap to ask for help, or express a feeling, and I hope that the people in their life know better to say, yeah, thanks for sharing, I'm sorry you're feeling that way, I've been there, right? That sort of empathy. I like to think we're a little more empathetic today than our parents' generation and our grandparents' generation, but that doesn't mean that there's not outliers.
Well, in the community, and like the veteran community that I've seen, I think this is part of because they've kind of exercised these toxic masculine traits for so long, and then they realize that they need to try to change, so they try to reach out for help, and the expectation, like being that they're reaching out for help, and the comparison of who they usually are strikes the person that they're reaching out to so strangely that they dismiss it because of that. And that's kind of what I've seen. And I get that feedback from the veterans that I work with. They'll be like, I tried to talk to my wife this one night and she just wasn't having it. And obviously there's a billion different variables there also in that story. But like what I have to try to tell a lot of guys too is like, listen, if you tried once and like it didn't go well, same as like if you tried one therapist and you're like, I don't like this therapist, dude, you got to keep trying, man. Like there's other ways to get there. You know what I mean? And it might not be that therapist, it might be another therapist. You tried talking to your wife, she shot you down, try to take her aside and say, I need to talk to you about something that's serious, and make sure that she understands that this change in your demeanor is a significant change and it's something you need to talk about. You know what I mean? And that, and like kind of refining the norms of manhood, and like telling, again, guys to just suck it up and deal with it. And I like to see where the norms of manhood, what like the normal is going to be considered in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Because again, I feel like it's changing for the better for the most part. I just deal with this little demographic that we run into these issues on. But okay, so other than that, and some other positive examples of toxic masculinity, Brad, do you have any other questions, comments, concerns?
No, I think we covered.
Other than that, what else do you do that's like, I'm trying to think of other things that I do that are examples like positive masculinity. Like I talked about this before, but I genuinely enjoy the show The Gilmore Girls. I've seen every episode multiple times. The only problem I have with that show is I do think Rory is a piece of shit. But everything else about that show. And I talked to Jake's lovely fiance Lizzie about this at our Christmas party because I brought up to Jake, I was like, yeah, man, we were watching Gilmore Girls right before we got here. Jake kind of looked at me for a second, and then Lizzie was like, oh, I love that show. And I was like, yeah, me too. And we started talking about Lizzie defended Rory, which I appreciate, but she's a piece of shit. If you watch that show and really watch it, like she's terrible at everything, and she just makes everyone else feel bad about it. But no, I mean, I hope that we are practicing things that are positive and masculine. And again, it doesn't seem like it it's hard, but also not hard because it's just expressing your emotions. And that was also, when I was a kid, was kind of portrayed in a super negative way. Like if you did explore your emotions and like just express them and talk about them. So it's even more of a hill that you have to try to climb to get to the place where you can truly feel comfortable. And it's like, guys in my life, I tell guys in my life that I love them all the time. Like if I genuinely feel that way and I love them, like I want them to know I love them. And I say that to them. And I noticed that, again, in the military community, it wasn't weird because that's just something, like there is a true love that you have for your brothers and your sisters when you serve and stuff. So it's not weird. And so I love that that's a positive part of that to me too, that I kind of carried over still.
And I think it's important to know that men can change too, like, right? Like I think about, I started with the example of my dad, like not telling us that he loved us, or hugging us, things like that. Watching my dad now as a grandpa, he's like another person, right? I'm like, who is this guy?
It's not fair. It's not fair.
Right? Because he's so loving. And even with us, he's learned that he wants to say those things now. And, so it's a beautiful thing that men can, the world is changing and there are men that are changing right along with the world too, and doing some really awesome things, and making it a better place to be a guy. Too. So
don't you feel like when you become a grandpa, you're going to be such an awesome grandpa?
I hope so. Yeah.
Because it's like you go through everything as a father, and it's like you're also dealing with just the weight of life and bills and just making it and all this other bullshit. But by the time you're a grandpa, like you pretty much usually got all that stuff figured out. So now it's like all I'm going to do is spoil my grandkid, get him all sugared up, and send him right back to my kid's house. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, and I see that with my dad too, which is so awesome, and it's so beautiful to get to watch too. You know what I mean? I do love that. But okay, before we stop talking, unless do you have anything else you want to say about toxic masculinity?
No, I was just gonna say, going back to like, I grew up like my dad. He wasn't like a dick about it, but he'd be like, "Are you a man or a mouse?" And he would ask me that all the time, right? And he'd be like, "Are you a man or a mouse?" So I found myself when my son was born to just, I've talked to him. Hey, Gavin, it's okay. Feel what you're feeling, right? And he wanted a baby doll, so we got him a baby doll. You know what I mean? And it's a night and day difference to like how I was raised to how I'm raising Gavin, and I don't know.
It's just awesome. Being super supportive.
Oh yeah,
it's like course. Whatever. Like if that's what makes you happy, like, and you're not hurting anybody. Here you go.
Just on a side note, though, I never knew they made baby dolls with wieners. I didn't know that.
Like they're on there now?
Oh, yeah.
Oh. So I'll tell you one thing. If you go to other countries, if you go to other countries, they're not as they don't hide that kind of stuff like we do here.
Yeah.
So like in the Philippines, you go to any like tourist shop in the Philippines and there is this little toy, and I have it. And if you know a Filipino person, they also have it. And it is a person, it's a guy, and he's got a barrel around him. And you pick the barrel up, and he has a wooden wiener on a spring, and it pops up. And it's just like, look how funny this is. And every Filipino person I've ever met has that. And like you can see them anywhere. In a lot of other countries, they just don't care about that kind of stuff. And we're kind of like a little more. But also it's a doll. And I'm just like, you're probably just wasting time to do that, right?
Yeah.
It's cutting into your costs if you wanted to do that. But anyway, but the other part that I wanted to talk about, which is one thing that Matt and I are both a part of, there is something in Kankakee County that has been going around that doesn't have a lot of, I don't think it has as much, there's not as much of an understanding about it as there should be, but there is a mental health referendum that's coming up to vote soon. And I also wanted Matt to kind of expand upon that a little bit, if you wouldn't mind, man.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for letting me talk about it.
Yep.
It's not being talked about as much as I'd like to see it. Our community recognizes that there's a mental health crisis going on, and we have an opportunity to do something about it in our county. So the referendum on our April 4th ballot would add a 1/4 of a cent sales tax that would go solely to our county's mental health services. So it's a pretty exciting thing. A lot of counties in the state of Illinois have a property tax mental health board, so it's part of their property taxes. Only a couple in the state of Illinois have this sales tax, and so I know that they're modeling a lot out of Rockford, what they're doing, and if you know anybody in Rockford, they're doing a bunch of really amazing stuff for mental health services. Yes, really amazing stuff, and they've got kind of excess money that they kind of don't even know what to do with. They're doing so much great stuff. So the group of people that have kind of asked to put this on the ballot have asked for 1/4 cent. So we're talking, you're going to pay an extra penny when you buy a coffee at Starbucks. This is not a big thing. You're going to pay 1/4 when you spend $100. It's not a big tax, but they're looking at it gaining about $3 million a year for mental health services in our county, which could be huge. A lot of service providers in our county depend on grants, which are great. And there's a lot of really great mental health grants that are coming down the pipe right now. But grants aren't sustainable. You can't depend on them year after year. They're not going to keep the services. And so we got to have something that's sustainable, that's going to last. And this is something that can be around forever. And so, it's on the April 4th ballot. Like I said, I'm asking people to vote yes for this measure. Nobody likes to pay taxes, but this is something active that we can do to address a real crisis that we're having in our community. Right. Serious crisis. And, I really like how it's going to work too. I mean, so because it's a sales tax, the county board will, develop a board of people that will decide where this money gets disposed or sent to. And so we're hoping that board of people will be parents that have kids who have had mental health struggles, agencies who will not be applying for the services. So, you can't be someone that can receive the funding to be on that board. So they're going to be people that know our mental health landscape, know what services we have available and who needs what. So they're going to get to decide where that money goes. Organizations can apply for these grants or for this money. And so, that's kind of how it works. I think that's another sort of question that people might have is like, well, who gets to decide where that money goes? And so it's really going to be community members who are really involved in the mental health services and know where our shortfalls are and things like that. This is just a really important thing. You talk to any police officers, most police officers will tell you that they would like a social worker or a mental health person to be on their teams to go to mental health calls because I think I saw a quote from Alice Winford recently that said they're masters of all, or what's that quote?
Jack of all trades, master of none.
Jack of all trades, master of none. Yes, and they don't feel equipped to deal with a lot of these mental health crises that they go on. This money could go towards providing a mental health personnel for every police department in our county. We don't have competitive salaries for a lot of mental health professionals in our community, so people aren't like heading to Kankakee to start up counseling practices or organizations. That's a problem. Psychiatrists, if you know anybody who's tried to get a psychiatrist appointment, you will know that they're on months, if not year-long wait list to get into a psychiatrist, especially for kids. It is not a cute situation. And so this money can go to address that. It can go to pay staff to hire new psychiatrists, things like that. So there's a lot that can be done with this year after year. So I'm really excited about it, and I really think that people should be talking about it and just voting on it.
If you have any question in your head, if you don't think that mental health is an issue in our county, one, I feel like if you just really think about it yourself, whoever you are, you're going to be like, yeah, we could probably use some help. But if you're not sure, like you said, talk to any cop, talk to any person that works in a hospital, talk to anybody that deals with the public on a daily basis.
Talk to anybody in a school.
Anyone in a school and tell me that there's not a need for this. And you brought up Chief Swinford, who is phenomenal.
He's the best.
When I went to him, we have an advocacy program called Spartan Shield that's going to be coming out very soon where we are, and we've actively been doing it, but we actually have an app that's going to be coming out. And We respond to veterans in crisis. And so if a veteran gets picked up by a police officer or in a hospital and they identify as a veteran and that they would like to talk to a veteran advocate, we would show up not to provide a service, but just to let them know, hey, man, it's okay that you're doing this. Like, you're not alone. I've been there. And I brought it to Chief Swinford, and I talked to him about it first. And he was just like, this is a phenomenal idea. Because I wanted to also, because I don't know, I'm coming from an outsider's perspective. So I come into it saying like, hey, I'm not trying to do anybody's job. I think that this would be a good thing. I think it could help everybody. And he goes, it's not our job to be mental health professionals, which is very true.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's so necessary. And to talk to anybody in our county, you understand why it's necessary. And a common misconception that I've seen is like people think, well, we have mental health services, so we don't need this. And I'm like, okay, call one and ask for an appointment and see what they tell you.
Yes.
Like I've had outside of the county, I've had veterans reach out to the VA that wanted to kill themselves and they didn't get connected to a resource for like 3 or 4 months. If you're experiencing a significant mental health issue, how long are you willing to hang on? How long are you willing to wait for that appointment to open up?
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of, I feel like that's part of the point of why this is so important.
Yeah. Our community mental health agency in the community is a severe staffing issue right now, as many places do. One of the things that they do is they provide a suicide risk assessment for children in the county. That service now has no staff, and so they outsource suicide risk assessment to neighboring counties. So I know of multiple families who are sitting in the hospital waiting hours and hours and hours. I mean, we're talking like 17 hours sitting in the hospital ER waiting to come be assessed to even be considered to go be hospitalized. Like, that's unacceptable.
Right.
And we can address staffing shortages with money. All these things just require a little bit of money. Or a lot of bit of money, and we can do something to just chip in a little bit. Like you said, the grant funding is not dependable. I don't know if anybody remembers. I'm talking almost 10 years ago now, we had the budget impasse. Several agencies locally had to fire like half their staff or lay off half their staff at that point. That puts our community at great risk when these agencies are laying off some of their staff.
Right.
And we can avoid that happening. I mean, we're on the edge of a recession. Who knows? That could happen again real soon, right? And we can do something to address this right now so that we don't have to lay off staff. We can kind of hold over that money for those agencies so they don't have to lay off staff until this impasse, were to come back around. So it just makes perfect sense. I hope that people reach out to people in their life and ask questions. If you, like you said, if you don't know what the state of our mental health crisis is in our county, ask almost anybody.
Yeah. And if people want to learn more, where can they go?
So there is a Facebook group called Kankakee County for Mental Health. It might be called Kankakee County Citizens for Mental Health. I'm not 100% sure of that one, but they can go to that Facebook page. There is an offshoot of the Community Foundation website as well that has kind of a landing place for the mental health referendum. I would tell them to start on the Facebook group, though. I think that's a great place to get some questions answered. You can also get posters and sort of like promotional materials for this referendum as well. We're really trying to get yard signs out and information about the tax out there, so they can seek out that. I'm always I'm constantly in the mental health world. So if they want to reach out to me, they can do that. Hit me up on Facebook or wherever.
I was going to ask that too. If people either want to contact to find out about this or contact you, how could they go about doing that?
Good question. I mean, I would encourage people to just add me on Facebook. I just add people because I'm a networker by heart. I think I'm a social worker that fell into counseling, but I love kind of being that person that kind of knows what's going on in this landscape. So I'm happy to point people in the right direction for things. So feel free to add me as Matt Hedding-Hess on Facebook and ask those questions. But yeah, anything I can do to help that I'm happy to do.
April 4th.
April 4th.
That's when the voting is. So make sure if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, reach out to Matt Hedding-Hess on Facebook and follow that very closely. Again,
I would also add April 4th is during some spring breaks around locally. So if you're traveling, early voting is going on now. So you can vote on this right now.
It's very important. So you can go out right now to vote on this. Again, it's like nobody wants to raise taxes. Like nobody wants to raise taxes. But when you look at what this is, you understand how much is being taken and what it's going towards. and where the needs are and who those needs are being felt by and are affecting the most, it seems to me that it makes a lot of sense. So I hopefully look forward to seeing a very positive turnout for that vote. Okay. But other than that, Brad, do you have anything else? Do you have anything else about toxic masculinity, referendum, the monkey videos that you like to watch?
There might be a new one.
A new monkey video?
I don't know. There's like new monkey videos. Dude, I don't know. I'm obsessed.
You asked me earlier when we were driving here. He was like, "I'm thinking." You told me you were thinking about buying a monkey, and I was like, "They're illegal in Illinois." I already looked because I did. I looked, and like the rule changed in like 2011, and then I looked to see if I was right, and I remember that law, and I don't remember a lot of other things, but I remember state monkey law because I was going to buy a capuchin, and then I found out that I couldn't do it.
I'm pretty sure that if I bought a monkey, my wife would leave me.
You bought a monkey?
Yeah.
And just dress them up in your clothes and just have them like smoking a cigar or something like that, like real cool.
Dude, you got to watch the one of her swimming. It's adorable.
I'm not going to watch any.
Come on.
I'm not going to watch any.
All right, fine.
I will rewatch Gilmore Girls another 5 times before I watch one of those monkey videos.
Oh, challenge accepted.
But Matt, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on, man.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I look forward to talking to you again and hopefully on here again. And thank you out there for tuning in. If you have any other questions, comments, or concerns, remember you can reach out to Matt Hedding-Hess on Facebook, or you can reach out to us at the I'm Fine Podcast Facebook page. So thank you again for tuning in. Be good, be well. We'll talk to you soon.